Yeah, glad to be here.
Today, we're pointing the magnifying glass at something that touches absolutely every single one of us.
Right.
We are looking at what it means to actually live. I don't mean just, exist, pay your bills, make it to the weekend.
Just surviving.
Exactly. Not just surviving. I mean, experiencing life at its absolute peak, where you aren't just reacting to things happening to you, but you're actively participating in a state of, well, continuous profound awareness.
Which is a tall order.
It is a massive order, and we are pulling insights today from a truly fascinating source. We're looking at excerpts from the book Living Enlightenment by Paramahamsa Nithyananda.
It's quite a text.
It really is. Now, this material is dense. It is packed with Eastern wisdom, psychological framework-shifting concepts, and some deeply challenging ways of looking at our everyday reality.
It is a profound collection of insights. And I think to really set the stage for you listening, it helps to understand how the author actually defines living enlightenment.
Yeah, let's start there.
The premise here is highly specific. It is described as actualizing your limitless potential and experiencing the ultimate as every moment of life unfolds afresh.
Unfolds afresh. I love that phrasing.
Right. What stands out immediately is that this isn't framed as a distant mystical finish line.
Like sitting in a cave.
Exactly. It's not meant only for ascetics meditating in an isolated Himalayan cave. It's presented as a highly practical, active state of being.
Right.
It's about flowing energy,
Yes.
synchronizing with the natural rhythms of the cosmos, and really allowing yourself to live the most vibrant life possible right where you are.
Which is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We're going to take you through the core philosophical pillars of this material, step by step.
A roadmap, essentially.
Yeah. We are going to start with the messy stuff. How to navigate and overcome negative emotions. Then we will wade into the deeper end of the pool to explore the mechanics of the mind, the actual science of karma, and a truly radical reframing of death.
That section is intense.
Very intense. And from there, we'll look at the path to blissful living through meditation. And finally, unpack the deeply misunderstood role of the spiritual master.
It's a deliberate progression. We start by examining the immediate, tangible friction of daily emotions, and then we slowly pull back the lens to look at the broader cosmic scale of consciousness and existence itself.
So as we get into this, I want you to take a quick inventory of your own life right now.
Good idea.
What feels heavy? What feels like it's holding you back? Is there a lingering emotional barrier you just keep hitting?
Or maybe a low-level anxiety about the future.
Right. Or maybe just a creeping sense that you are going through the motions on autopilot. Keep that in mind, because the perspectives we are about to explore are specifically designed to act as a crowbar. Yeah, prying open those stuck places and shifting how you view your reality. Let's start right at the surface with the first major theme, which is all about the realization that fundamentally you are your emotions.
Yes.
And the very first distinction drawn here is between love, lust, and expectation.
This distinction is crucial because it completely redefines terms we use every day. The framework presented here draws a razor-sharp line between lust and love.
But not in the way we usually think.
No, exactly. It's vital to understand that it is not just talking about physical or sexual lust. Lust is defined much more broadly as any energy that demands.
Any energy that demands.
Right. It is a fundamental mindset that looks at a situation, a person, or even a career and constantly asks, what can I extract from this?
What can I get?
Yes, what can I get? It is entirely transactional. Love, on the other hand, is defined as an energy that gives. Its operating question is, how can I enrich?
How can I enrich? That is such a huge shift.
It really is. When you interact with the world around you, are you looking to extract value or are you looking to add value? That is the absolute dividing line between living in lust and living in love.
That reframing of lust is so interesting to me. It turns it into an economic term, almost.
A transaction?
A literal exchange of goods.
Yeah. And to illustrate what it feels like to live in these two different states, there's this incredible analogy of ice and water in the text.
The ego as ice.
Right. The ego, that transactional, demanding part of us, is compared to frozen ice. When you are ice, you have a rigid shape. You have hard boundaries. You are solid, defensive, and separate from everything else.
You're an isolated block.
Exactly. But love is compared to liquid water. Only when we melt, only when we drop those rigid defenses and become liquid water, can we actually merge with the ocean of existence.
Right.
Because if you are ice, you are just bobbing on the surface of the ocean, constantly knocking into other chunks of ice, creating friction. But as water, you become part of the whole. The implication there is profound. True love in this context, requires a complete surrender of that rigid individual boundary. The underlying philosophy suggests that all human beings are actually born as inherently loving beings.
We start out as water.
Exactly. Think of a newborn baby. They radiate a sort of causeless, uncalculated love. But as we grow, society systematically instills fear, comparison, and greed into our conditioning.
We freeze.
We freeze. Our love becomes highly conditional. We learn to love with a reason, love with a cause.
Like, I love you because you make me feel safe.
Or I love you because you were successful. The ultimate goal is to strip away that conditioning and return to a state of causeless love. You aren't loving someone because of specific utility they provide. Loving simply becomes your natural default state of radiating energy.
I can definitely hear people listening to this and thinking, okay, that sounds poetic, but what does that actually look like in practice?
It's hard to conceptualize.
It is. But there is a Zen story included here that perfectly captures the vibe of someone living in that state.
Oh, the one about speaking.
Yeah. A curious disciple goes up to a Zen master and asks, does an enlightened master speak? The master shakes his head and says, no, an enlightened person never speaks.
So the disciple tries to figure it out.
Right. He asks, oh, so does an enlightened master keep quiet? And the master says, no, if he keeps quiet, he is not enlightened.
Which is a great Zen trap.
Total trap. Now, the disciple is totally confused. He asks, well, what does he do then? And the master replies, he sings. His being sings. He neither speaks nor keeps quiet. His very being sings.
It is a beautiful metaphor, and the singing doesn't mean breaking into physical song, obviously.
Like a musical.
No, not a musical. It represents living entirely without the friction of the ego. It means that when you experience and project true love, it is not a calculated intellectual choice you are making after weighing the pros and cons.
It's not a strategy.
Exactly. It is an effortless overflow of your inner state. You can't artificially manufacture that state. You can't pry open the petals of a flower and demand that it bloom. It has to blossom naturally from within. And when that causeless love does blossom, it acts as the ultimate healing agent for the deep existential restlessness of the human condition.
And it goes beyond just making us feel better internally. This energy actually interacts with the physical world.
Yes. The material points to the Cleve-Baxter experiment.
Right, the polygraph experiments. For anyone unfamiliar, back in the 1960s, a man named Cleve-Baxter hooked up polygraph machines, lie detector machines, to the leaves of simple houseplants.
Just ordinary office plants.
Just standard plants.
Yeah.
And he discovered that the plants actually responded on the monitors to human emotions and thoughts happening in the same room.
It's wild.
It is wild. If a person simply formulated a genuine, violent thought about burning a leaf, the plant's stress levels spiked wildly on the polygraph before the person even moved.
Just from the thought.
Just from the intent. The underlying point being made here is that existence is a massive, interconnected living energy web. Everything, down to the ficus in your living room, responds to the frequency of your love or your hostility.
If we follow that logic, it raises a rather uncomfortable question about how we conduct ourselves daily.
Very uncomfortable.
Because if our internal emotional states have a tangible, measurable impact on the environment and the living things around us, then carrying around negative, transactional, demanding energy is literally polluting our shared energetic space.
They become a walking hazard.
Well, literal hazard. And this leads directly into the assertion that expectation is the absolute first enemy of love.
Oh, expectation.
Yes. The exact moment you expect something in return for your love, whether you expect deep gratitude, returned affection, or just the social reputation of being a quote-unquote good person.
The moment you want a receipt for your love.
Exactly. It instantly ceases to be love and downgrades into a business deal. To transcend this friction, we have to recognize those expectations and actively drop them.
That is a tough pill to swallow, realizing how many of our relationships are actually just mutually beneficial business deals.
It confronts a lot of our normal behavior.
It really does. But moving from love, we have to tackle two of the heaviest, most debilitating emotions we carry: worry and fear.
These are universal.
Yeah. Let's start with worry. The framework defines worry as an illusion completely manufactured by the mind.
It's synthetic.
Exactly. The mind acts like a conspiracy theorist. It takes completely unconnected, independent, painful thoughts, strings them together with imaginary red yarn, and creates a massive narrative of continuous worry.
And it's not just a mental exercise.
No, this manifests physically. It is pointed out that worry directly impacts the navel area, the Manaparaka chakra.
The energy center in the gut.
Right. When you spin out into worry, that specific energy center physically shrinks and tightens. That is exactly why, when you hear terrifying news or you're agonizing over a decision, you get that heavy, sick, churning feeling right in the pit of your stomach.
It is a highly accurate observation of the mind-body connection. The mind creates the illusion of a continuous, insurmountable problem, and the physical body pays the immediate physiological price.
Your gut takes the hit.
Every time. Fear, however, is categorized slightly differently in this framework.
How so?
Well, while worry is the mind connecting unconnected thoughts, fear fundamentally stems from resisting the natural cycles of existence.
Resisting cycles.
Yes. We experience deep fear because we desperately want things to remain permanent, even though change and dissolution are the only true constants in the universe.
There is another Zen story used here to illustrate our resistance to these natural cycles, and I have to admit, it is jarring.
The blessing story.
Yes, a very wealthy, powerful man goes to a highly respected Zen master. He asks the master to write down a profound blessing of prosperity on a scroll, something his family can frame and cherish for generations.
He wants a plaque for the wall.
Right, a really nice heirloom. So the master takes out his ink and a big brush and writes, "Father dies, son dies, grandson dies."
Brutal.
Just brutal. The rich man reads it and is absolutely furious. He screams at the master, "I ask you for a blessing of prosperity, and you write a curse on my family."
The master's response to that outrage is the absolute key to understanding fear.
Yeah, it shifts everything.
The master calmly explains that it is not a curse at all. It is the ultimate expression of the natural progression of life. He tells the rich man, if your son dies before you do, it will bring you unbearable, unnatural agony.
Right.
If your grandson dies before your son, it will be a profound tragedy. But if your family passes in the exact order I have written, father, then son, then grandson, that is the natural course of existence. That is true peace. That is true prosperity.
Wow.
What is fascinating about this story is how it highlights our modern recoil from the very concept of death. We label the natural cycle as a negative, terrifying curse, when in reality, it is our deep-seated resistance to this natural order that causes our most profound psychological pain.
Exactly. We fight the tide and wonder why we are exhausted. And this concept of natural cycles is brought right down to the micro level of our very breath.
The physiology of it.
Yeah. The act of inhaling is compared to the Big Bang. It is pure desire, pure expansion, life energy rushing into the vessel.
Drawing the universe in.
Right. And exhaling is compared to a black hole. It is pure fear, dissolution, emptying out, letting go. Every single breath you take is a microscopic cycle of birth and death.
And we resist it.
We do. The argument here is that when we subconsciously resist this natural cosmic expansion and contraction within our own physical bodies, when we hold our breath in anxiety, when we refuse to fully let go on the exhale, we create profound internal disturbance.
We fight the exhale.
Yes, we literally make ourselves sick by resisting the micro-deaths happening in our chest every few seconds.
It completely shifts how you view an automatic biological function. If you can learn to accept the exhale, the letting go, the emptying, the little death, with the exact same grace and totality that you accept the inhale, you begin to conquer fear at its absolute root.
You stop fighting the current.
You align yourself with the cosmic rhythm. But of course, the ego absolutely despises letting go. The ego is obsessed with accumulation and permanence. Which brings us to a fascinating analysis of guilt, jealousy, and the ego. Let's look at guilt first. Guilt is provocatively described here as the original sin.
Okay, I have to push back on this a little bit, because that completely flips the traditional Western narrative on its head.
It really does.
Because in most cultures, we view guilt as a necessary moral compass. If you do something bad, you are supposed to feel guilty. That proves you are a decent person. How does this framework justify calling guilt the original sin?
It is a radical departure from the conventional view, you're right. In this context, guilt is not seen as a useful moral tool. It is seen as a highly destructive manifestation of the ego that keeps you hopelessly trapped in the past.
Trapped in the past?
Yes. Guilt is almost always a societal imposition. Society creates a set of rules, you break one of those rules, and then you are heavily conditioned to feel guilty. But look closely at the mechanics of guilt. It doesn't actually change your behavior in a positive, forward-moving way.
Right, it's just feeling bad.
Exactly. True remorse or understanding might change your behavior, but guilt just makes you feel inherently flawed. It makes you feel fundamentally separate from existence.
You become obsessed with your own badness.
Yes, the ego loves that. The argument is that feeling guilty is the real sin because it creates a massive artificial barrier between you and your true blissful nature. You end up spending all your life energy punishing yourself, nursing your own unworthiness, instead of living intensely and constructively in the present moment. Guilt is the ego's way of keeping you focused entirely on yourself.
That makes a lot of sense when you separate guilt from actual corrective action. It's just wallowing.
Wallowing is a great word for it.
And then there is jealousy. The point is made that jealousy is a uniquely objective emotion.
Objective meaning it requires an object.
Right. Think about it. You can feel deep sadness, completely alone in a dark room. You can feel fear alone. But to feel jealousy, you require an object. You absolutely need another person to compare yourself to.
You need a mirror.
Yes. And to explain the mechanics of this, there is this brilliant ladder analogy.
Oh, the infinite ladder.
Yeah, imagine that all of humanity is standing on the rungs of a gigantic infinite ladder. By default, our ego places us somewhere right in the middle.
Always the middle.
Always. So we spend our entire lives clinging to our rung, looking up at the people above us, feeling intensely jealous and inadequate, and then looking down at the people below us, feeling terrified that they're going to catch up and overtake us.
It is the ultimate blueprint for the rat race mentality. And the tragic irony, as is often pointed out, is that even if you win the rat race, you are still just a rat on a ladder.
Still on a ladder.
Comparison is not just the thief of joy. In this philosophy, it is a violent denial of your own unique nature. To illustrate the folly of this comparison, the author uses the example of the Chinese bamboo tree.
This is a great example.
When you plant a Chinese bamboo seed, for the first 4 years, you see absolutely zero visible growth above the ground.
Nothing. Just dirt.
To the naked eye, it looks like it is failing miserably compared to every other plant around it. But in the 5th year, that bamboo shoots up and grows 90 feet. In just 6 weeks.
90 feet.
In 6 weeks. For those first 4 years, it wasn't failing. It was painstakingly building a massive, complex root system underground capable of supporting that sudden explosive growth. If that bamboo tree possessed a human ego and compared its visible progress to a fast-growing weed, it would have felt terribly inadequate and depressed for 4 years.
That is something I think everyone needs to hear, especially in the age of social media where we are constantly comparing our underground root building phase to someone else's 90-foot explosive growth phase.
Social media is literally a digital ladder.
It's the ultimate ladder. We all have our own timeline. But the ego fights this natural unfolding. The ego thrives on comparison, friction, and resistance. There is a deep psychological insight here. The ego absolutely loves to say no.
It defines itself by saying no.
Think about your own physical reaction when you say no to someone. You feel firm, you feel solid, you feel in control of your boundaries.
Feel like the ice again.
Exactly. But when you truly openly say yes, you feel liquid, vulnerable, and yielding. This explains so much about human nature. It explains why little kids and teenagers instinctively want to break rules.
Rebellion is just a giant no.
Yes. Breaking a rule is just a giant physical no thrown at authority. It makes the ego feel incredibly powerful, distinct, and alive.
Which brings us perfectly back to the opening analogy of ice and water. The ego desperately wants to be ice. It wants to say no. It wants to maintain rigid boundaries. It wants to be separate from the authority or the environment. But living in enlightenment, actualizing that limitless potential, requires saying a profound yes to existence.
Melting into the yes.
It requires melting, becoming vulnerable, and becoming liquid water. It requires mastering these surface emotions by realizing that our minds are constantly actively tricking us. The mind is a survival machine that generates ego, guilt, worry, and jealousy out of thin air simply to give itself a problem to solve, keeping itself relevant and in control.
And realizing that your mind is essentially a rogue machine generating problems is the perfect pivot to part 2 of our deep dive. The deeper truths of life.
Moving from the surface to the depths.
Yeah, we are moving from the surface waves of emotion down into the deep ocean currents of the human experience. The first major concept we encounter here is the mind maze, and a very specific technique to navigate it called unclutching.
Unclutching is a phenomenal concept.
It is. Now, to understand unclutching, we have to look at a diagram described in the text. I want you to visualize this with me. Imagine a blank screen, and suddenly a small red rectangle flows across it, then a blue one, then a green one. These rectangles represent our independent thoughts and experiences.
Just isolated moments.
They just pop up organically. A memory of a great cup of coffee, a thought about a stressful deadline at work, a flash of a childhood memory. In reality, these are completely independent, isolated events.
Right. They are just passing phenomena. But the mind cannot stand isolated phenomena. It craves narrative.
It needs a story.
So the mind actively creates artificial structures, what the framework calls a pain shaft and a joy shaft. The mind takes those completely independent floating rectangles and forcibly strings them together. It will take a painful memory of being embarrassed in middle school, draw a thick line connecting it to a minor frustrating interaction you had with a cashier yesterday, and then tie both of those to an anxiety you have about a presentation you have to give tomorrow.
All strung together.
Suddenly the mind declares, look at this pattern. My life is a continuous, unbroken stream of suffering and rejection. But the actual connection between those three events does not exist anywhere in the physical universe. It only exists in the artificial pain shaft your mind just constructed.
The mind is just an overly enthusiastic archivist drawing red string on a corkboard between things that aren't related.
Perfect analogy.
So how do we actually stop it from doing that in real time? If I'm sitting at my desk and my mind starts weaving that web of anxiety, what is the practical tool? This is where the core technique of unclutching is introduced. Now, it is really important to clarify what this is not.
It's not suppression.
Right. Unclutching is not about violently suppressing your thoughts. You are not trying to force your mind to be blank, which we all know is impossible anyway. Unclutching simply means refusing to supply the red string.
Just observe the rectangle.
You let the thought of the stressful deadline arise, you observe it, and then you let it fall away, without actively connecting it to the thought that you are an imposter who is going to get fired. You literally disengage the clutch exactly like you would in a manual transmission car.
The car analogy is the perfect way to visualize the internal mechanics of this. When you are driving a manual car and you press the clutch pedal to the floor, what happens? The engine can still be running.
It can be screaming.
You can even press the gas pedal and the engine will roar, the RPMs will spike, but because the clutch is disengaged, none of that power is transferred to the wheels. The car does not move forward.
You're just making noise.
Right. The thoughts and emotions in your mind are the engine. They can rev up, they can roar, they can be incredibly loud. But when you practice unclutching, when you step back into the witness consciousness, you sever the connection between the thought and your identity. The thought happens, but it doesn't drive your actions. It doesn't move the wheels of your life.
That is a massive paradigm shift. It means I don't have to stop the anxiety from appearing. I just have to stop letting it drive the car. And this cuts right to the root of how we identify ourselves. It's argued here that the very first foundational illusion we all fall for is the simple thought, I am the body.
The ultimate illusion.
The second you clutch onto that thought and accept it as absolute truth, you instantly inherit every single fear, pain, and limitation of the physical body. But if you can unclutch from that fundamental assumption, if you can drop the mind's relentless storytelling, a totally new reality dawns.
The reality of the witness.
You realize you are not the doer. You are the witness. You are the pure consciousness that happened to be watching the body and the mind operate.
And shifting from the doer to the witness directly informs the next major theme, which is decoding karma.
This is a big one.
Now, karma is a term that has been heavily diluted in the West. We tend to treat it like a simplistic cosmic scorecard or a vending machine. Put a good deed in, get a good reward out. Do a bad thing, get punished.
Like cosmic karma points.
Exactly. But the science of karma presented here is vastly more sophisticated. It defines karma essentially as the collection of your unfulfilled experiences and incomplete actions. And it breaks this down into three highly specific operational types.
Yes, the breakdown is fascinating. Let's walk through the three types. First, you have Sanchita karma. I picture this as a massive subterranean bank vault.
The master vault.
It is the total accumulated sum of all the karma, all the incomplete experiences from countless past lives or existence cycles. Second, you have Prarabdha karma. This is the specific portion of karma that you have withdrawn from the vault and brought with you into this current specific lifetime to exhaust.
Your starting hand.
Right. This Prarabdha karma dictates your starting conditions, your basic physical setup, your inherent psychological tendencies, the initial trajectory of your life. And third, and arguably the most relevant to us right now, is Agamya karma.
The karma we are making right now.
This is the brand new karma you are actively gathering and generating right now in this lifetime through your current actions and, most importantly, your current mindset.
To truly grasp how we generate this new Agamya karma, we have to understand that the system evaluates intent far more heavily than physical action.
This blew my mind.
There is a classic story used to illustrate this, involving a monk and a prostitute who both die on the same day and stand before Yama, the Hindu deity of death and cosmic justice.
Yama is not messing around.
Not at all. Outwardly, in the physical world, the monk lived a flawless ascetic life. He wore the proper robes, he lived in the temple, he performed the rituals. Outwardly, the prostitute lived a life of societal sin and degradation. But when the judgment is handed down, Yama sends the monk straight to hell and welcomes the prostitute into heaven.
Okay, wait. Let's pause here. I can hear the pushback from the audience. Are we saying that physical actions don't matter at all? That someone can do terrible things, but as long as their intent is pure, they get a free pass? How does Yama justify this judgment?
It is a provocative story specifically designed to challenge our superficial judgment of actions. Yama's reasoning gets to the absolute core of how karma is recorded. He tells the monk, while your physical body was sitting perfectly still in the temple, your internal mind was constantly obsessed with lust, craving the worldly pleasures you were denying yourself.
He was unclutched from the temple and clutching the world.
Exactly. Yama says you were physically a monk, but energetically and mentally you were deeply indulging in the material world. Then he turns to the prostitute and says, while your physical body was forced into a terrible, degrading situation for survival, your inner mind was always fixed on the divine, constantly praying for liberation and maintaining a pure inner space.
Her inner space was clear.
The story is not giving a free pass to harmful behavior. It is driving home the point that karma is not a tally sheet of your physical movements. It is an energetic imprint of your inner space. You cannot fake your inner space to the cosmos.
So, applying that to our modern lives, how are we generating this agamya karma right now? The text explains that karma is born from incomplete experiences. Let's say you are writing an email to a coworker who threw you under the bus.
We've all been there.
You type out a passive-aggressive response. If you hit send while holding on to that lingering bitter resentment, you didn't just send an email, you created an engram.
A karmic knot.
Because you experienced that anger incompletely. You held on to it, you brooded over it. It leaves a residue in your system. You just planted a seed of agamya karma that is going to pull your consciousness right back into that exact same feeling of bitterness tomorrow.
Precisely. If you do something, anything, whether it's eating a meal, experiencing a moment of anger, or showing affection, and you do it with total 100% intensity and absolute awareness, it passes right through your system.
It doesn't stick.
You are liberated from it. It leaves zero residue. But if you hold back, if you act with hidden motives, guilt, or half-heartedness, it creates a karmic knot. It becomes an enneagram that will magnetically pull you to repeat similar situations until you finally learn to experience it fully and completely.
Like being stuck in a loop.
This radically changes how we view an enlightened being. An enlightened master doesn't sit frozen doing nothing. They act dynamically in the world, but they accumulate zero karma because they perform every single action with complete totality, out of pure compassion, with zero attachment to the outcome or hidden desire. They leave no footprints.
Which brings us to the ultimate horizon line, the final theme of this section, and the biggest fear most of us carry: death.
The great unknown.
The material has a shockingly positive stance on this. The chapter is literally titled, Death as a Celebration. It forcefully argues that death is not a final ending, an annihilation of the self. It is described as a deep relaxation, a necessary transition.
The shoe analogy is great here.
Yes, it's compared to taking off a pair of incredibly tight, painful shoes at the end of a long, exhausting day. The argument is that our profound, paralyzing fear of death is merely the ego's fear of discontinuity. The ego is terrified of losing its accumulated identity.
The historical narratives used to explore this are deeply thought-provoking. Consider the story of the sage Jataharatha. He was an advanced spiritual seeker, a man who had renounced the world to live in the forest and meditate on the ultimate reality.
A very advanced guy.
But one day, he rescued an orphaned baby deer and over time became deeply attached to it. When Jataharatha was on his deathbed, taking his final breaths, instead of focusing his highly trained mind on liberation or merging with the divine, his last thought was entirely consumed by earthly worry for this deer.
Who's going to feed the deer?
Exactly. Who will protect it from the tigers? Because that anxiety was his final, most intense thought. Because that is where his consciousness was anchored at the moment of transition. The ancient texts say his consciousness was pulled by that enneagram and he was reborn as a deer in his next life.
It sounds like a fable, but the psychological principle it illustrates is terrifyingly clear. What you remember in the last moment counts.
It's the anchor point.
Your final anchoring thought dictates the trajectory of your consciousness into the next state. It emphasizes that you cannot fake your spiritual progress at the moment of death. And contrast that anxiety with the Zen master, who demonstrated absolute, almost humorous mastery over the dying process.
I love this guy.
This master casually announced to his disciples that he had decided to drop his body and die at 6 a.m. the following morning. His disciples were incredibly upset, but mostly because it was the dead of winter, and standing outside performing the death rites at 6 a.m. would be freezing cold.
I was worried about the weather.
Right. They actually asked their dying master to please wait a few hours until the sun came up so they wouldn't have to freeze. The master smiled, said, "Sure, no problem," and simply delayed his own death until exactly 12 noon.
While it carries a comedic tone, it points to a state of absolute spiritual sovereignty. The text asserts that a truly enlightened being has conscious, deliberate control over their own life energy and can consciously choose the moment to exit the physical form entirely without fear. But perhaps the most compelling part of this section is the detailed cognitive map it provides for what actually happens during the death process for the average person. It breaks down the shift in perception.
Yes, the 4D cognitive shift.
Mhm.
I found this to be the most mind-altering concept in the entire text.
It's a total inversion of reality.
It explains that right now, as we go about our day, we perceive the physical world, our office, our car, our bank account, in incredibly vivid, solid 4D reality. Meanwhile, our inner spiritual life, our karmic state, or even our dreams feel vague, distant, kind of like a black and white movie.
Easy to ignore.
Very easy.
Yeah.
But at the exact moment of death, a massive cognitive inversion occurs. The entire physical world that you spent your whole life prioritizing suddenly loses its solidity. It fades instantly into a black and white, meaningless dream. It ceases to be real.
And your inner world takes over.
Simultaneously, your internal reality, your karmic knots, your unfulfilled desires, the actual state of your consciousness bursts into undeniably vivid, terrifyingly real 4D clarity.
It is a deeply sobering visualization. The external things we spend 99% of our waking lives agonizing over, fighting for, and protecting will instantly become as intangible and meaningless as a fading dream, while the state of our inner consciousness, which we consistently neglect and ignore, will suddenly become our absolute, unavoidable reality.
It's a terrifying thought if you haven't been doing the work.
To help conceptualize this transition without fear, the author uses the analogy of an empty clay pot. Imagine a clay pot sitting on a table. Inside the pot is a specific volume of space. Outside the pot is the infinite space of the room. When the clay pot falls and shatters, what happens to the space inside?
Nothing happens to the space.
It isn't destroyed, it doesn't bleed, it doesn't scream. It simply merges instantaneously and seamlessly with the infinite space outside. Death is exactly that. The breaking of the fragile, temporary clay boundary of the body. The consciousness inside is completely untouched.
That is a stunningly beautiful way to reframe something that causes so much existential dread. It's just the breaking of the clay. But the material is very clear about one thing. You cannot just sit here, intellectually agree with the clay pot analogy, and expect to be totally fearless when your time actually comes.
Intellectual understanding isn't enough.
Not at all. To prepare for that ultimate transition, you have to actively practice living blissfully and fearlessly in the present moment right now. You have to train your consciousness. And that brings us perfectly into part 3 of our deep dive, Paths to Blissful Living, focusing on the actual science of meditation.
This is where the text shifts gears from profound theoretical philosophy into tangible, daily practice. It begins by mapping out human consciousness into 4 distinct states. We are all intimately familiar with the first 3. The waking state, where we are active, the dreaming state, where the mind creates illusions during light sleep, and the state of deep, dreamless sleep, where the mind finally shuts down and rests.
But there is a fourth.
The framework introduces a 4th state, known in Sanskrit as turiya, which translates roughly to a state of pure, blissful awareness or thoughtless reality.
Let's really dig into how these states interact, because understanding the bleed between them is the key to why we feel so exhausted all the time. The text points out that for the vast majority of us, our dream state is constantly, relentlessly bleeding into our waking life.
The waking dream.
Think about your commute to work. You are physically awake, your eyes are open, you are driving a 2-ton machine, but mentally, you are completely dreaming.
You're not in the car.
You are fantasizing about a vacation, replaying an argument from 3 years ago, projecting anxiety about a meeting. You are not actually there. This constant bleeding of the dream state into the waking state is what causes our mental dullness, our lack of sharp focus, and our general pervasive sense of suffering.
That is exactly the diagnosis. And the prescribed cure, the entire goal of meditation, is to completely reverse that directional flow. Meditation is not about escaping reality. It is the rigorous practice of accessing the turiya state, that pure, unclutched, peaceful witnessing awareness, and training yourself to allow that state to penetrate and overlap your waking life.
Pushing the bliss into the waking state.
Exactly. When you reach a point where you can maintain that underlying, unshakable current of bliss and witnessing awareness while you are awake, typing an email, dealing with a difficult client, and even while your body is asleep, that continuous, unbroken state is what is called living enlightenment, or Jeevan Mukthi. You remain fully functional in the world, but your internal space is utterly untouched by the chaos.
And achieving that state brings us to the concept of sannyas, which the book redefines in a way that makes it accessible to everyone, not just monks. Normally, in Eastern traditions, we think of a sannyasi as someone who has physically renounced the world.
Giving everything away.
They give away all their money, leave their family, shave their head, and go live in a Himalayan cave. But this text forcefully argues that true sannyas is not about giving up the physical world, it is about giving up the illusion of the world.
It's cognitive.
It is a cognitive shift, not a geographic one. A worldly person, a samsari, is constantly consumed by the question of how do I exist? How do I get more money? How do I get more security? How do I raise my status? A sannyasi, on the other hand, shifts their focus to existence itself. They stop fighting the current and simply flow with what is.
This shift in focus leads to the most empowering realization in the entire text, that bliss ultimately is a choice. It is not a byproduct of favorable circumstances. To illustrate this, the author shares the story of a highly revered Sufi mystic named Abdullah.
The laughing mystic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Abdullah was famous throughout the region for one thing. He was always laughing. He constantly radiated joy. When it came time for him to die, he lay on his deathbed, surrounded by weeping disciples, and he was still laughing uproariously. One of his disciples finally asked, "Master, you are dying. What could possibly be so funny?"
What was the joke?
Abdullah shared his ultimate secret. He said that when he was a young man, his own master taught him a simple truth. Every single morning when you wake up, life presents you with a binary choice. You can choose to be happy, or you can choose to be miserable. Abdullah said, "I simply wake up every day, look at the choice, and choose happiness."
I love that story, but I know our listeners are going to have the exact same reaction I did. I have to push back here. It sounds too simple.
It does sound simple.
If someone listening just got laid off from their job or they're going through a brutal divorce, telling them to just choose bliss sounds incredibly dismissive, almost toxic positivity. How does this philosophy reconcile the choice of bliss with very real human suffering?
That is the essential question. The framework does not advocate for toxic positivity or pretending that painful things aren't happening. The key lies in a highly specific morning technique the text provides. It instructs the reader, tomorrow morning, the exact moment you wake up, before you even open your eyes, before you look at your phone, sit up in bed, and internally declare with absolute authority, "I decide to be blissful for no reason at all today." The critical operative phrase there is "for no reason at all."
Ah, okay. The lack of a reason is the secret ingredient.
Exactly. If you are blissful because you got a promotion, or because the weather is nice, that is conditional happiness. It is dependent on an external factor, and the moment that factor changes, your happiness collapses.
You're a victim of circumstance.
But if you anchor your decision to be blissful in absolutely nothing, for no reason at all, you become what the text calls choiceless. You are no longer demanding that the universe rearrange itself to fit your preferences before you allow yourself to be happy. Paradoxically, by being completely choiceless in your acceptance of whatever reality brings your way, even a layoff, even a divorce, you are making the ultimate unshakable choice for sustained internal peace. You remain the witness.
That makes a lot of sense. You're decoupling your internal state from external variables. But let's be totally honest with each other. Waking up and just deciding to be eternally blissful for no reason is incredibly difficult when the mind immediately starts chattering about the electric bill and the dog throwing up on the rug.
The conditioning is incredibly deep.
The text acknowledges this reality. It argues that while these techniques, unclutching, choosing bliss, are incredibly simple on paper, breaking the vicious, deeply ingrained lifetime cycles of the mind is nearly impossible to achieve entirely on your own.
You need help.
You need an external catalyst. You need a shock to the system. And that brings us to the final and perhaps most vital section of our deep dive. Part 4, the ultimate catalyst, the role of the master.
The concept of the guru, or the enlightened spiritual master, is deeply central to Eastern traditions, but it is often deeply misunderstood in the West. This text places immense importance on the master, but it carefully redefines what a master actually does. The master is not a university professor who gives you new intellectual information to memorize.
Not a teacher in the traditional sense.
The master is not a savior who hands you the ultimate truth on a silver platter. The master acts as a pure, flawless, perfectly still mirror. Their only function is to reflect your own consciousness back to you so clearly that you finally recognize the divine truth that is already fully dormant inside you.
I absolutely love the story used in this chapter to illustrate the function of the master. It's the story of the lion and the cub. It goes like this. A pregnant lioness is hunting, and she attacks a flock of goats. During the chaos of the attack, she goes into labor, gives birth to a male cub, but tragically dies in the process. The goats return, find the newborn cub, and out of instinct, they adopt him.
A lion raised by goats.
So this lion cub grows up entirely surrounded by goats. He thinks he is a goat. He learns to eat grass, which makes him weak. He learns to bleat instead of roar. And most importantly, he learns to be terrified of predators and run away at the slightest noise. He is 100% convinced of his goat identity.
Completely identified with the illusion.
Then one day, an adult lion attacks the flock. The goats scatter, but the adult lion stops in his tracks because he sees this young lion acting like a terrified goat, cowering in the grass. The adult lion walks over, grabs the young cub by the scruff of the neck, and drags him to a calm pool of water. He forces the young cub to look down at his reflection, right next to the adult lion's reflection. Then, the adult lion rips off a piece of raw meat from a fresh kill and shoves it directly into the cub's mouth. The text says that the exact moment the cub tastes the raw meat and the blood, his true nature instantly awakens. He spits out the grass, stands up, and lets out a massive, earth-shaking roar.
It is a striking, visceral metaphor for the awakening process. The core insight there is that the young cub didn't have to go to a cave and meditate for 20 years to transform into a lion. He already was a lion. The realization of his true inherent nature took only a fraction of a second once the correct catalyst was introduced.
An adult lion.
The philosophy explains that the spiritual master is that adult lion. Enlightenment itself does not take time. It is an instantaneous cognitive snap. What takes time, what takes years or decades, is building the bridge of profound trust so that the disciple, who believes they are a goat, will finally stop running away long enough to accept the meat, the direct transmission of awakening energy from the master.
And the master doesn't just wait around politely. They actively use tools to force this awakening. The text calls these tools shastras, which translates to knowledge weapons.
Knowledge weapons.
The master's spoken words, the intense meditation techniques they prescribe, sometimes even their seemingly erratic body language or harsh behavior, act as precision weapons designed specifically to slay the disciples' ignorance and shatter their ego. It is not always a gentle, hand-holding process. Sometimes it has to be a violent shock to the system, just like violently shoving raw meat into the mouth of a cub that thinks it's vegetarian.
Which brings us to the complex dynamics of the master-disciple relationship. The text describes this bond as the ultimate cosmic love affair, but it is a love affair that progresses through distinct evolutionary stages. It almost always starts with the intellect.
Mazurabhava.
Yes. The disciple reads a book or hears a lecture and is intellectually intrigued by the master's teachings. They think, this makes logical sense. This initial intellectual stage is called madhurabhava. But as the disciple practices and as trust builds, the relationship moves beyond logic, beyond words, into a state of complete merger of being, where the disciple's ego drops and they feel absolutely no separation from the master's vast consciousness. This ultimate state of union is called mahabhava.
But getting to Mahabhava is a brutal fight because the ego fights this surrender every single step of the way. The ego hates the master because the master's only goal is the ego's death. There is a great, highly relatable story about our resistance.
The blind man.
A blind man is wandering alone in the freezing, treacherous mountains of the Himalayas. He trips and loses his wooden walking stick. Panicking, he desperately feels around in the snow until his hand grabs what feels like a smooth, curved, sturdy piece of wood. He leans on it. It's actually a frozen, highly venomous snake.
He thinks it's a stick.
He starts using it as his cane, feeling secure again. An enlightened master happens to walk by, sees exactly what is happening, and shouts at the blind man, "Drop that immediately, you fool. Yeah. That is not a stick, it's a frozen snake. The moment the sun comes up and it thaws, it will strike and kill you." But the blind man, entirely trapped in his own darkness and ignorance, clutches the frozen snake even tighter. He yells back at the master, "You liar." You're just trying to trick me so you can steal my perfectly good walking stick.
It is a brilliant, tragic representation of the human condition and our attachment to our own suffering. We are the blind man. The frozen snake represents our ego, our karmic engrams, our deeply held pain, our resentments, our jealousies. We lean heavily on our trauma. We build our entire identities around our pain, thinking it supports us and gives us a reason to exist.
We clutch the snake.
The master, having clear vision, can see perfectly that we are clinging to something toxic that will ultimately destroy our peace. But because of our profound ignorance and our fear of losing our identity, we view the master's attempts to remove our ego not as salvation, but as an attack, a direct threat to our survival.
It requires an immense, almost superhuman level of trust to willingly drop the snake when you can't see what's actually in your hand. And the text makes a beautiful clarifying point here. The disciple always chooses the master. The true master doesn't go around knocking on doors, aggressively recruiting followers. The master is described as choiceless energy, flowing constantly and naturally, exactly like a river.
A river doesn't care who drinks from it.
It doesn't judge the deer or the tiger that comes to the bank. It simply flows. It is entirely up to you, the individual seeker, to recognize your thirst, walk to the bank, and make the conscious choice to step into the water.
And this inherent dynamic is exactly why the text describes finding and surrendering to a living master as the ultimate luxury. Think about how we traditionally define luxury in the modern world. We consider luxury to be flying first class, owning a massive house, or having total financial freedom.
Material things.
But the framework argues something entirely different. Having a fully realized being who takes on the massive cosmic responsibility of guiding your specific soul out of the relentless, painful cycle of karma. Someone who will patiently, endlessly wait for you to slowly build trust. Someone who will act as an unwavering mirror until you finally see your own divinity. Having access to that is the highest possible privilege and luxury a human being can experience in a physical body.
Okay, we have covered an absolutely massive amount of ground today, navigating from the shallows of our daily emotions all the way into the deep waters of cosmic consciousness. Let's pull all of these threads together. When we look at the entirety of this journey through living enlightenment, what is the ultimate synthesis?
If we distill the entire philosophy down to its essence, it outlines a highly practical path of total human transformation. It begins by finding the fundamental energy to actually change the things in your daily life that need changing. Overcoming those draining transactional emotions of lust, worry, and the trap of guilt.
It's a surface level.
From there, it moves into developing the deep intelligence and clarity to accept the things you fundamentally cannot change by understanding the cosmic laws of cause and effect karma and accepting the natural, inevitable cycle of death without resistance.
Accepting the exhale.
This acceptance naturally blossoms into a profound mental clarity where you realize that everything you are experiencing, both the deeply joyful and the terribly painful, is ultimately a changing, passing phenomenon. You learn to unclutch. This unclutched state opens the door to deep devotion and trust, most effectively facilitated by the mirror of the master. And when all of these elements finally integrate within you, it culminates in total liberation, what the author calls living enlightenment.
The ultimate realization.
The core, resonant message of the entire text is a reminder that you are not a biological accident. You are a conscious, deliberate miracle of existence, and you are fully, inherently capable of experiencing this ultimate state of continuous bliss.
And the true beauty of this deep dive is realizing that these ancient, profound concepts are completely applicable to your daily life starting right now. You do not need to quit your job and move to a monastery in the Himalayas. Whether it is practicing the internal mechanics of unclutching when you receive a stressful passive-aggressive email at work, or making the radical conscious choice to declare yourself blissful for absolutely no reason before you even open your eyes in the morning.
Or just recognizing the snake.
Or just having the sudden realization that the heavy anxiety you are carrying around today is nothing but a frozen snake that you can simply choose to drop. The actual tools for living enlightenment are fully in your hands today.
The application of the knowledge is exactly where true wisdom begins. A text can only provide the map. The territory of enlightenment must be walked and lived.
Absolutely. And to close out our journey today, I want to leave you with a final lingering thought to chew on. It is a question directly inspired by the text's intense description of that 4D cognitive shift at the moment of death. If at the exact unavoidable moment of your ultimate transition, all the physical wealth, the carefully curated social status, the urgent emails, and the daily stresses of this world instantly fade into a black and white, meaningless dream. And only your spiritual clarity, your inner peace, and your unfulfilled engrams remain in vivid, unavoidable 4D color. What in your life today is actually vivid enough, actually real enough to survive that shift? And how does knowing that change exactly what you'll prioritize when you wake up and open your eyes tomorrow morning? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We invite you to keep questioning your assumptions, keep unclutching from the narratives, and continue your own profound journey of discovery. Until next time.